Well, good evening, Agape family. For this week's 7 at 7, we're going to do something very different. As many of you know, Julie and I, along with a group of others here at Cottonwood Creek, went to Greece recently. The itinerary of that trip was inspired by the Apostle Paul's second missionary journey. We read about that journey in the book of Acts, starting with chapter 15, verse 36, and going through chapter 18, verse 22. We got to visit places like Athens, Corinth, Ephesus, Thessaloniki, Berea, and Philippi. So I thought I would take the opportunity this evening to share a bit of what we saw on that trip. And tonight I'm going to show you the ancient ruins of the city of Corinth. Corinth was a bustling city in the first century, perhaps even more so than Athens at that time. Corinth sat on a piece of land that is an isthmus, a narrow strip of land between two bodies of water, the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea. The Greeks founded the city of Corinth centuries before Paul ever got there. In the first century, there were as many as a couple of 100,000 people living there. Like most other Greek city-states, Corinth had a temple. This one was dedicated to the mythological Greek god Apollo. And these columns are all that remain of that temple. Here you can see the proximity of the city to the sea. In the book of Acts, chapter 18, verses 1 through 18, Paul is in Corinth. Now, Paul always taught in the synagogue first, that is, to the Jews first. And Acts 18:8 tells us that Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. Remember, there were Jews living virtually everywhere in the Roman Empire at that time. They had scattered centuries before when the Assyrians attacked the northern kingdom of Israel. So it's no surprise that there was a synagogue in Corinth. Archaeologists have discovered fragments with writings from the Emperor Claudius, which reference Gallio, the Roman proconsul of this region in the first century. You can see here the Greek letters carved into this tablet, and it very specifically spells out Gallio. And this reference to Gallio aligns with the biblical story told in Acts. Acts 18:12 tells us that some Jews in Corinth tried to bring Paul up on charges in front of Gallio for worshiping God in unlawful ways. Now, the Greek word for this place of judgment is called the bema. A bema was a raised platform where a judge would address an assembly. And this is a rendering of what the bema in Corinth could have looked like. In Corinth, part of the bema still remains. In the case against Paul, Gallio dismissed the case, stating that it was an internal Jewish matter and not a matter for the Roman courts. And we can't overlook the significance of this incident with Gallio and Paul because it set a precedent of tolerance toward Christianity within the Roman legal system, allowing Paul to continue his work without Roman interference at that time. Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, working as a tent maker and teaching the gospel to the people in Corinth. While he was there, he was rejoined by his companions Timothy and Silas, who he had left in Berea when that place became hostile to Paul. Timothy and Silas brought encouraging news to Paul about the new believers in Thessalonica, which led Paul to write a letter back to those believers. And this letter became what we know as 1 Thessalonians. The Bible tells us that while he was here in Corinth, Paul met a man named Aquila and his wife Priscilla, who had recently fled Rome when the Emperor Claudius ordered all the Jews to leave that city. When Paul decided to move on from Corinth, he went to Ephesus. Aquila and Priscilla went with him and stayed in Ephesus while Paul returned to Antioch. This place was buried for centuries, until the late 1800s when excavations began in this area. Early excavations focused on the central areas of the city, the Temple of Apollo, the Agora or marketplace, and other public buildings, fountains, roads, and some residential areas. The discoveries that have been made in Corinth, along with other extra-biblical historical documents, are pieces to a puzzle that scholars have had to put together, both literally reconstructing the physical stones and columns, and informationally. Ancient Roman documents provide valuable information. The excavations in this area continues, however, while much of Corinth has been unearthed and major structures have been explored, large portions of the city's full expanse remain buried. It's exciting to think about what other findings are still there to uncover, literally. Well, I hope this was interesting to you and hopefully inspiring as well. It was a privilege to be able to visit these areas, and I felt God calling me to share it with my Agape family. Hopefully it will bring the biblical story to life for you as it did for me. May God bless you this week, and I'll see you soon.